All right, good evening, everybody. Welcome. My name is Maureen Conway. I'm Vice President for Policy Programs, Executive Director of the Economic Opportunities Program here at the Aspen Institute. I'm so delighted to welcome you to this evening's event. We're thrilled to be doing this together, Ida and me. I don't have lots of announcements. I just want to say a big thank you to Prudential. Ida and I have been really doing a lot of work around reconnecting work and wealth, and we're really grateful for a major investment from the Prudential Foundation that's really helped us move that work along both individually and collectively, and also with our colleagues in the Forum for Community Solutions and the Future of Work initiative. So we're thrilled that Prudential is not only the lead sponsor for tomorrow's summit, but also supporting a lot of the other deep work that we're doing here around these issues in the Institute. And my one announcement that I wanted to make is some of you may be having a little agenda confusion. You may have seen Paul Osterman as a speaker on the original agenda. Unfortunately, that was our snow casualty. But we are super grateful to Jared Bernstein, a friend of both of our programs and a great friend of the Aspen Institute, for being willing to pitch in at the last minute and join us for this conversation. So that explains that.
That's great. And I also just want to echo Maureen in welcoming all of you and just saying what a joy it was coming back to Aspen, almost with an explicit purpose of figuring out how we could take some pretty siloed conversations about people's financial lives and the role of wealth and savings and the role of debt and volatility in their lives, and connect it more to people who are really dedicating their careers to explicitly thinking about career paths and quality jobs. So all of the work that we're doing in this Reconnecting Work and Wealth initiative is a giant moving live experiment to see how it is when you put people together who have different day jobs each day, trying to extend themselves, because at the end of the day, my consumers are Maureen's workers and vice versa. And for all of America, we want them to be thinking about how these issues connect. So we actually started the work together with Prudential's help and with the Ford Foundation and many others at our first Economic Security Summit last fall. And we're going to start off with a quick video now, just to give a few snippets of what people were saying about the issue of reconnecting work and wealth at the summit in October.
This theme of reconnecting work and wealth is incredibly important.
Work is really the primary means by which people support themselves. Wealth is the primary means by which individuals can protect themselves against sudden or large drops in income.
That means if you are working a full-time job, you can live a middle-class life. You can put a roof over your head, you can feed your family, you can take a vacation once a year, you can have that retirement security and healthcare security that comes with being in the middle class, and you can make a difference in your workplace and in your community.
I'd say it's the theme of this conference, which is the increased divergence between overall economic growth and the well-being, the prosperity, the wealth of middle class and poor households.
But our system of work and wealth isn't working well.
I think that people have lost a sense that if they work hard and play by the rules, they're going to be able to get ahead in life and provide a better future for their families. And when you lose that sense, it's absolutely crushing for our society and for our democracy.
You see it in the politics and you see it in a lot of other indicators, but a lot of folks think that no matter how hard they work, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to get ahead, that they're going to be able to accumulate wealth.
So being in workforce development, we've learned that jobs aren't enough, right? So to get a person a job is one thing, and that's a great thing. But then how do we help people manage that money?
So if you think about families and the kinds of decisions they have to make, some of the most difficult involve the risks they face. What if I lose my job?
People are working really hard to make a wage, but yet if they're not saving and actually providing for their financial security in the future, their families will continue to remain unstable.
And so I think reviving that basis for middle-class American hope is the central challenge that we're facing.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think so oftentimes we look for the kind of one bullet solution to everything. So it's income, or it's jobs, or it's assets. But clearly, it's all of those things put together.
We sit at the intersection of workforce development and financial education because I don't think you can do either without the other effectively. Not to a point where you're going to help to transform a person's quality of life.
and how do we make sure that both sides of the house, on people who are working in the labor market and people who are working on the financial market, are talking to each other and understanding how this work collaborates. So it's incredibly important that as workforce development organizations, as employers, are thinking about how do we reconnect these people to quality jobs. At the same time, they need to provide the right types of financial benefits and resources and tools to ensure these families have economic stability for their future.
I think that there's a knowledge base, both in terms of how people see organizing and power on the wages side and how people see policy and research on the asset side, that if brought together in the right way around a core set of issues, could be really transformative for working people in this country.
Good evening, everyone, and I'm going to be your third welcomer from the Aspen Institute. I'm Elliot Gerson, Executive Vice President, and it's really terrific to see so many of you here tonight on the eve of our second summit on inequality and opportunity. I'm glad that we got the video with IT working. I thought there were some wonderful snippets there that give us a flavor of the kind of conversations that we've had around these topics and the quality of much deeper conversations that we're going to be having. While apologizing for little IT glitches, for those of you who haven't been here before, I also apologize for this pillar in the middle of the room. Some of you have seen this pillar before. It is not the only reason that we're actually moving to new offices, but it's among the reasons. So I look forward to having all of you here at the new Aspen, Washington headquarters. Many of you know us. We also have, of course, a campus in Aspen and offices in New York and actually now all over the world. But Washington will remain our headquarters, and we have a wonderful new building. We look forward to you welcoming all of you that we'll probably move to in December without any pillars like that. It would have cost quite a few middle-class incomes to remove that pillar, so we decided that we would not do it. One thing I want to just do, and again, we can't thank our supporters and friends like Prudential enough for this, is just remind some of you, many of you may know one little piece of the Institute, and like many institutes, that tends to create a sense of multiple silos that don't necessarily talk to each other. You know, we are fundamentally are an organization about values-based leadership. We're about public education. We're about changing the conversation around critical issues, and we have policy programs across a broad swath of American domestic policy and foreign policy. But if anything, we have a critical mass around issues of inequality and opportunity. And depending on how directly focused our policy programs are on that, you know, we have anywhere from 3 to as many as 8 or 10 that grapple with those issues. So in a sense, they're really at the heart of what we do, and I think most of us believe that there are no more critical issues in the country than the issues that we're talking about today. They relate to everything else. They affect everything else. And I think as a matter of fundamental, moral definition of the country, there's nothing more important. So whether, and I mentioned Prudential, it's sometimes hard to get these programs to actually work with each other. Not that people like Ida and Maureen don't love to work with each other, and you can tell that, and the other programs that are involved in this, the same thing. But unfortunately, in many cases, their funders are interested in a particular focus. And like most organizations, we have to respond to where the funding is. So it's only when we have really far-sighted funders who recognize the synergies across programs that the real opportunities for coordination and cooperation are able to be advanced. So, these programs, whether they're researching, exploring, and advancing ideas to restore the promise of work or strengthen the middle class, or just to build an economy of shared prosperity, they're all better off by working together. You saw the principal actors of the two the key sponsoring organizations, the Economic Opportunities Program of Maureen, the Financial Security Program of Ida, and also want to note the Future of Work Initiative, the Forum for Community Solutions, all of them really focused on this important topic of reconnecting work and wealth. And with the help of Prudential, we're finding new ways to really dig into these issues in ways that we were not able to before. So we hope the discussion tonight will just prime you for what will be happening tomorrow. And now it's just my simple pleasure and really a great privilege to introduce Lotta Reddy, Vice President of Corporate Social Responsibility at Prudential Financial and President of the Prudential Foundation. Her very impressive biography, I think, is in some materials that you have, so I will not repeat that, but just offer a few highlights. She leads a team at Prudential that sets the vision and strategy for the company's investment, philanthropic, corporate contribution, and employee engagement activities. And under her leadership, and this is absolutely extraordinary, and I'm not missing a digit here when I say this, Prudential has pledged to build an impact investment portfolio of $1 billion by 2020. She holds degrees from the University of Michigan and Emory Law School. She's obviously an extremely busy woman, and we are honored to have her with us this evening to offer some framing remarks for the conversation that's about to happen. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Elliot, and good evening. On behalf of all of us at Prudential, I just want to say how excited we are to be working with the Aspen Institute to bring together these really crucial conversations on wealth and work. Now, for us, it really extends an ongoing conversation that we've been having inside of Prudential, and one that is actually rooted in our founding. Over 140 years ago, the company that is now known as Prudential Financial was created as a way to afford working families a way to enhance and protect their financial well-being through affordable insurance. Now, in the words of our founder, the justification of our business was to advance the efforts of our policyholders and their families for better economic and social conditions. So that was our original charter. Now, over a century later, we've grown into a financial services leader, helping to meet the protection, retirement, and asset management needs of people around the world. But our commitment to advancing society and shared success remains strong. What has changed is, as I said, we're a global corporation, right? And, competing and operating in an ever-changing economy. This means that we see the connection between work and wealth from multiple perspectives. First, as an employer, right? We have 50,000 employees around the world, so we see firsthand the need to address the financial wellness of our own employees in ways that are mutually beneficial. Second, as you know, our employer customers, right, are coming to us and looking to us for solutions to address the financial strains and stresses of their own workforce. And third, we certainly are familiar, right, through our partnerships with people like Aspen and many of you in the room, familiar with these issues and the challenges that we see today, right, and the focus that we all have on how the changing nature of work and changes in how our society invests in people, businesses, infrastructure, and communities are impacting, right, major shifts in our labor and financial markets, as well as how wealth is created and shared. And so as we as a firm continue to address the financial concerns of a world that is living longer, younger, and faster, we see that the American dream, right, that shared ideal we all have, that if people are willing to work hard, they should be able to achieve some semblance of financial security and ultimately prosperity, is for many American workers slipping out of reach. 21st century innovation and structural shifts are transforming work far faster than our current safety nets and policies can keep pace. These changes have transferred economic risk from broad structures to the fragile balance sheets of American households, causing financial instability for many. This instability erodes the foundation for success and the ability for people to reach their goals and achieve their dreams. Working people need to find solid ground before they or anybody in their family can take the steps needed that lead to upward mobility. A crucial component is, of course, a quality job. Now, I think we all agree that a quality job at a minimum is safe, that it provides, right, a livable wage, that it has a regular and predictable schedule, and that it offers essential benefits. Financial stability also involves having sufficient assets and protections in place, so savings and insurance that can help smooth income volatility, right, and expense fluctuations. And these fluctuations occur when people have a health emergency, or when they're between jobs, or when their jobs don't give them regular hours, and when they retire as well. Working people can save only when they have enough income to support the basic needs for themselves and their families. They are also better equipped when their jobs provide them with the financial products and services and tools that facilitate saving, things like retirement plans and insurance, again, that help them to weather emergencies. A person's ability to earn an adequate income and build wealth is in turn essential to achieving household financial security. Now, given the intrinsic connection between work and wealth, we must consider them together, looking at how both labor and financial markets influence the opportunities people have to achieve long-term financial security. Simply said, we must reconnect work and wealth. To that end, Prudential and the Aspen Institute are partnering to advance critical dialogue on how employers, policymakers, advocates, and communities can create solutions to address the growing fragility of the American worker. The partnership builds on a long-standing relationship we've had and was born out of the shared belief that we must bring together leaders from across sectors, like all of you, to learn from each other and collaborate to find ways to create opportunities for all Americans to earn a decent living and build wealth. We aim to make reconnecting work and wealth a key tenet of the national economic agenda, broadening the national conversation so that it's not talking about the problems separately, but together. And in doing so, and in partnership with all of you, we hope to highlight these issues while also identifying solutions to help build wealth for financially vulnerable people so they move toward financial resilience, stability, mobility, and prosperity. Thank you. And now it is my pleasure to introduce Melanie Trotman, who will be moderating this evening's conversation. Melanie?
Well, thank you, Martha and Elliot, for your introduction. I'm going to start by interviewing our panelists. And, they've researched or actually worked with individuals and families who are grappling with this issue of how to turn work into wealth, exploring questions such as, what financial challenges do people face? What are the barriers to building wealth? How do people manage their paychecks and navigate financial and labor markets, and are they doing it well enough? What tools and resources are available or need to be available to help them? So I'm going to interview them about these issues and the ways in which strategies might be improved to turn work into wealth. You do have their bios in your folders, but I'm going to introduce them and give you a little brief overview. We've got Tom Shapiro here. He's the Poe Cross Professor of Law and Social Policy at Brandeis University. Juan Salgado, President and CEO of the Instituto del Progreso Latino. Justine Zinkin, Chief Executive Officer of Neighborhood Trust. And Jarrett Bernstein, Senior Fellow at the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities. Juan is focused in part on alternative job training programs and the importance of stability as a precursor for financial mobility, including geographic mobility, which is, a pretty hot topic right now. Jared has researched federal and state economic and fiscal policies and trends and employment and earnings. He's also looked at the effects of financial and housing markets on consumers. Justine has stressed the importance of people having trust with their financial service providers and having transparent products and plans. She's also suggested that consumers' financial challenges could be addressed more often in the workplace. And Tom has, meanwhile, heavily researched wealth inequality and the racial wealth gap and the ways in which different benefits that people receive can yield different returns. So, I am going to start with you, Jarrett.
Right.
We know that low and moderate income Americans today face significant challenges accessing economic stability. Let's start by looking at work. There's been a lot of talk about how work has changed and how wages are stagnant, yet skill requirements are rising. Putting aside for the moment what work might look like in the future, how has it changed over the past several decades, and what do you see as the drivers of that change?
Well, let me begin where Latha kind of left off. I thought she teed things up nicely. My view is that structural changes have occurred in the economy that have interacted with policy in a way that's really eroded the connective tissue between workplace policy and income and thereby work and wealth. So let me just unpack that a little bit. Economies change, they evolve over time. That's a good thing. And we hear a lot about globalization and technology as kind of the two factors any the standard economist will tell you what's behind a lot of the kinds of changes. That's what he or she would tell you. But that's only part of the story, because these changes interact with a policy framework, and they interact with dynamics including immigration, racism, and macroeconomic issues, and politics, and political economy. And again, I think the heart of the problem that I've worked on with, it's been my fortune to work on with Aspen for a while, the thing we're confronting is that the connective tissue that used to, for at least some groups of people, ensure that work was better connected to income has eroded. So let me add a statistic to the mix right out of the gate here. If you look at the connection between median compensation, so middle class earnings, median compensation, not just wages, but all-in benefits, and productivity growth, which is output per hour, you will find that they both doubled from the late 40s to the late 70s. Now that doesn't mean, and Tom will tell you, that doesn't mean that everybody was doing as well. Of course, discrimination was very much in play, and not just racial discrimination, but gender discrimination as well. But it is true that median compensation doubled along with productivity from the late 40s to the late 70s. Since then, productivity is up 75, 80%. Median compensation is up 9%. Since 1979, that's 35, 36 years of stagnant earnings. And you have to ask yourself, how is a middle-class family supposed to get ahead and be able to put not only be able to get ahead and meet their basic needs, but be able to build wealth? And it's that kind of breakdown between overall economic growth and the compensation or incomes of middle-class families that I think is an exemplar of this eroding connective tissue. I've got a lot more to say about that, but let me stop there, just kind of set the table.
Thank you. So, Tom, you've done extensive research on asset development and the importance of something you call employment capital to building wealth. First of all, can you just tell us briefly what is employment capital? And then tell us what your research tells us about the challenges that face low and moderate income Americans, especially communities of color, who need to build and access wealth and opportunity.
Great question.
Yeah.
I know there's a lot of wisdom in the room, so I don't have a horizon of just having the only answers or ideas here. Let me pick off from a point that Jarrett was talking about. In 1970, the largest employer in the United States was General Motors. Approximately 500,000 or more employees, largely unionized, good wages, a good package of benefits, and I'll come back to that in a moment. Fast forward in that period that Jared was talking about from 1970 to 2013, the largest employer is Walmart, 1.3 million people. Very, very few, if any, unions at Walmart's. Virtually no benefits at Walmart's. And for me, that captures that transition that has happened both in the macroeconomy globally, but also due to the intersection with policy. So for me, part of that intersection has to do with even going back to the 1970s and understanding life might have been pretty good if you were a GM worker because of the union and because of the work stability. That the linkage there between income earned at work and wealth was a pretty solid one. And in a sense, that was an exemplar of employment capital. Employment capital, for me, is the understanding that what we get out of our work is a lot more than just the identity and the paycheck. It provides us some protection from unforeseen accidents, mishaps, family crises, from our car axle breaking in the ice in DC on storm days. It provides a bit of security, and it should provide opportunities. And at the end of the day, it also should provide some kind of retirement security. And those are the systems that have come undone, the systems that some workers, and I think it's really important to underscore that point, some workers were able to be invested in that system from post-World War II up until the 1970s, and it's come unwound for a lot of workers since then. But for me, the map that overlays that structure of who has employment capital and those benefits and those decent quality jobs with job ladders and you can actually go somewhere, the overlay, the map for me is occupational segregation. It's where women and workers of color were largely concentrated and still are largely concentrated in the workforce. Go to a hospital, go to a university, go to a restaurant, go to a hotel, go to a train station, go to an airport. Your eyes tell you what the sociologists know. So let me stop there for now.
Okay, thank you. So I want to hear from our practitioners about how these challenges are actually being felt on the ground in communities. I'm going to start with Justine and then turn to Juan. Justine, tell us a bit about what you do, your work at Neighborhood Trust, and what the greatest challenges are that face the people that you serve, both in terms of work and in terms of wealth.
Sure. So we are a relatively small nonprofit. We serve about 7,000 people annually in New York City. We are a financial empowerment organization. So for the past 15 years, we have been delivering trusted financial counseling and linking that to credit union products, and being particularly effective because our financial counselors have worked within trusted and relevant settings, nonprofit organizations, government agencies, and now for the last 5 years, employers. And we really realized over the years that while our framing had always been a financial one, trying to enable people to be better connected to healthy financial products, the reality was that as we were seeing individuals in the community, first of all, the level of financial distress was overwhelming. And secondly, we realized that everybody we were serving had a job. And they were working hard, but they still were spinning their wheels. And when we examined the opportunity to help and the underlying systems that could be at play, we realized the root opportunity, perhaps, was the employer, where people got paid. So for the last 5 years, we've been embedding financial counseling and support systems at work. Our financial counselors today are in 15 different employers. We're serving about 2,000 people at work annually. And it's really, a few things are really striking about what we see on a daily basis, again, as we're delivering one-on-one financial counseling to workers via their employer. First and foremost, what we offer is trust and a trusted relationship. And I can't emphasize enough how what we hear from our clients is that the ability to take control of their finances and feel like they can convert wages into savings is very much stymied by complete mistrust of the system, of the financial services system. The opportunity, conversely, is that even though there has been this changing nature of work and a changing relationship between employer and employee, what gives us optimism is that even though our typical client has more than one job and where we're serving them isn't their only place of employment, they still actually do largely trust their employer, and they are eager to make financial decisions at work, and they believe that the services and benefits that they're offered at work are credible. So there is actually greater take-up and greater willingness to sort of take action with their finances in the workplace compared to the other settings that we see. So there's sort of this note of optimism. And what I'll also add, and eager to talk more about this, is again, as we are a financial services organization, but increasingly focused on the workplace as the sort of platform for encouraging financial health, what we see is that there are numerous pain points for the employer as well. Employers are demanding our services in growing numbers. So the two largest hospital networks in New York City have approached us because they have told us that their employees are demanding they do better when it comes not just to wages, but to overall support around financial health. When we pick apart the employer, we realize there are people in the employer, the HR departments, who are struggling because they're offering an array of services and supports that go underutilized They're facing employees asking if they can borrow against their paycheck, against their 401k. Again, they're workplace systems that we believe could be better leveraged to help wages go further. HR departments and employers eager to figure out how those systems can be working more efficiently. And yet today, the system does feel largely broken, and overall, our clients who are working very much feel that their wages aren't really translating into financial stability.
Okay, thank you. And Juan, tell us about your work at the Institute and how these challenges collectively affect, the individuals and families that you serve.
Yeah, so we're in Chicago. We're in the primarily Latino communities of Chicago. We've been around for 40 years. And for 40 years, we've held a major belief that education is the power and freedom to live and enjoy the best that this country has to offer, the power to provide for our families and ensure a better quality of life. And so if you walk into, we serve 10,000 people a year. If you walk into my center on any given day, you're going to see people learning their own native language that are in a primary school. You're going to see people in adult education, English classes. You're going to see folks in bridge programs towards manufacturing and healthcare and retail careers that will be higher income for them and growth possibilities from them. We have a great partnership with our city colleges. We run schools for kids that are out of school, as well as STEM-oriented high schools. You're going to see a place that is full of people that believe that if they tap into the power of education, if they go to work 8 hours a day, and then after their 8-hour shift, they come to my center for 4 to 5 hours instruction, 4 to 5 days a week, there'll be a great job ahead, right? And there are, by the way, some of the pain points for the employers we work with is we're not building a pipeline fast enough to get the people from our community that can do this work, right? That can be college students. Let me just say one thing that is really important, that most of the students that we work with start at the 6th grade reading level, 8th grade reading level, right? When you think about that kind of a student, most of our colleges, community colleges in this country, haven't figured out how to really tap in to the power and strength of that student. And that student is a worker right now, by and large, that is in a very low wage occupation. And they know it. They know it. They know that if they stay in that occupation, the possibility of income growth is severely limited. They're doing everything they can with the dollars they're getting in. I mean, when I look at the amount of money they make, I think, what a terrible money manager I am. Really. I mean, think about it. And I used to work for an organization that help people to buy homes. And let me just tell you a couple stories because they're instructive. You would have immigrants that are making just about nothing, and they'd walk in with $10,000 in savings, right, that they had kept in the home. And then you'd have these young professionals that had gotten degrees, and they'd walk in with a pile of debt. They couldn't buy a home. And their incomes were very, very different, right? And so, from our perspective, as an education institution, there still is a power in education. There still is the possibility of upward mobility if more and more people tapped into that power, if we brought it to deeper and deeper levels of community and learners, right? And yet, let's be honest, I'm also in the community, right? If we ever get that right, it would be beautiful. And a lot of people would have better jobs. And I guarantee you, because they come from a place where they don't have great jobs right now, they do a lot with the new money they get, right? But even if we got to optimization, still a lot of people out there making just too little.
You wanted to say something?
I'd like to raise a question, one that maybe you could speak to, which is, so in my work, I look a lot at, what the economists would call the demand side of the economy, which is the availability of good jobs, and of all kinds of jobs, but in your case I'm asking about the availability of good jobs. Because in your opening statement, you kind of suggested that if people can take the kind of dedication that you're describing and that your center affords them an opportunity to express and improve their skills, their educational credentials, that there's oftentimes a good job waiting for them. And I think one of the things I worry about is that's not the case in enough places throughout the country. And so, clearly there's this problem on the supply side, what you described in terms of people's, skill levels and all that. But I want you I'd be interested in your reaction to, what kinds of constraints you see on the demand side, the quantity of available good jobs for the type of folks that are coming out of your center.
Yeah, your point is spot on. I mean, I'm in Chicago. I'm in a metropolitan area. I'm also serving a population that's underrepresented in certain sectors, and so obviously it's very clear. If you go to other places, other metropolitan regions, other rural economies, what we're doing, can't exactly be replicated. And again, as I said, if in fact we optimized and we met every employer need in our region tomorrow, we'd still have a whole lot of people out there, okay? We'd still have a whole lot of other people out there with very low incomes and with less than optimal possibilities. So by no means am I saying, I am saying though, as someone who believes in education, that we can't allow the narrative, right, that education doesn't matter to seep into particularly low-income communities. Because you know what? That's wrong. That's wrong.
Okay. Well, I think you all know that tomorrow is the Summit on Inequality and Opportunity. And we all know that inequality has multiple dimensions. Income inequality is, I think, what we hear about the most, but wealth inequality is even more dramatic. And the race, gender, and ethnicity dimensions of that inequality are something I think trouble all of you sitting here. So I want to start with Juan and Justine and ask, what's your sense of how these issues of inequality are being recognized and addressed in your communities? You touched on it a little bit. Maybe Justine, start with you. And do you see that there are more or fewer opportunities for people as they're trying to gain access to work and wealth?
Yeah, so again, we're in New York City. We're serving individuals who similarly are in fast food, retail, healthcare. Over 90% of the individuals we're serving are people of color. And when I look at, if I take one particular example, when we look at home, working with home health aides, it's 100% basically female. And we study what we can do for these clients of ours. We believe that, that this workforce is, as we all know, a highly skilled workforce, delivering a service that impacts all of our lives, right? We all have home health aid at some point in our life. And yet it is a very underpaid industry, and our workers are struggling financially because not only are their wages low, but because of this volatility in income. Because they are constantly getting new jobs, losing jobs, working part-time, they're struggling. And so what we try to help our clients do is to actually come up with some way that they feel like they have some visibility on what's coming. We help them build a cash flow plan. We break things down into their component parts so there is a way for them to feel like they are setting aside some funds for that shock that is coming. And to echo your remarks, the level of financial astuteness and smarts and sort of ability to stretch a dollar is incredible, but it really doesn't go far enough. So the typical client we serve, they're making about $18,000 a year, and they've got about $7,000 of consumer debt. When you pick apart how to improve that balance sheet, it is virtually impossible, really. And the challenge is that families want to save, and there's this conundrum around helping them figure out how to balance reducing debt and saving. So what I would say is employers are recognizing that their employees deserve a better share of the wealth, but I really struggle with what we can do to encourage that asset development outcome for an occupation like that. I'd say the one note of optimism is as the labor market tightens and as there's more demand, perhaps there will be some competitive pressures, but it is very, very tough. I mean, the numbers, we work and we help people to reduce their debt, but again, if you look at their balance sheets, I don't want to claim that we are going to help them permanently get out of debt. They are going to cycle in and out of debt while they are in an occupation such as this.
Yeah, home health aides, and I wrote about labor for the Wall Street Journal for 8 years, and I covered some regulations related to that, and they were supposed to begin getting overtime pay. Industry fought it. So, I mean, just at that base level of just even pay, there's been quite a bit of resistance for those workers.
I just add, we were part of the LISC-initiated effort to create financial opportunity centers from its inception. And what's interesting is that when they dug a little deeper, here we were doing some of the same financial coaching that Justine has talked about, but because we were putting people into as a system, right? We were putting people into just a regular entry-level job with no real career path, with low wages. You didn't really see a demonstratively, big impact on, their well-being at the end of the day. What you did do, by the way, what you did see is that financial opportunity actually, services actually assisted with job retention, right? Which is interesting to think about, right? Because there's so many benefits to ensuring financial wellness. And I would just say from an educator's standpoint, during the education process, sustaining, so this whole thing of perseverance, whether it's perseverance in the job or it's perseverance in education, requires this level of financial planning when you're making so little money. So I think that's where the value is. If we want people to persist, this is the kind of support that we need to provide.
Okay. Tom, you've looked specifically at racial inequality.
So these are stories, and plug. My book came out yesterday, Toxic Inequality.
Congratulations.
We interviewed over close to 200 families and their stories between 1998 and 2011. The stories add up to a landscape, though. And what the landscape is, in terms of wealth inequality, is something that I hope the data is familiar to people. 1% of the population, the wealthiest 1%, owns 42% of the financial wealth in the United States, largely driven by the top 0.1%. In fact, over the last 3 decades, the wealth of that group has increased threefold. The financial wealth of the bottom, air quote, 90% is not a bottom. Bottom 90% has declined. That's what the data tells. That's what the landscape. But there's also a geography within that. And the geography within that is that when we think about racial inequality, ethnic inequality, we in the past have tended to think only in income terms. And the metric there is the median African American family has about 60 to 62 cents on every earned dollar that the white family has. And similarly, very close for the Latino family. But that picture is not complete. To complete that picture, we also have to add in what family wealth is about. So 62% African American to white. When you look at family financial wealth, the average African American family has less than 8 cents in wealth for every dollar of wealth that the typical or median white family has. The typical Latino family has less than 10 cents, it's 9 point something, to every dollar that the white family has in average family financial wealth. Right? Those aren't just data. That tells us a lot about the ability of some groups and the challenge of other groups to protect themselves in the labor market, to protect themselves from that volatility, to not having paid sick leave and the impact of that, to not being fortunate enough to be employed by an employer that offers a structured pension system where they may seed it, they may contribute. In fact, about 65% of white workers work in such institutions compared to 54% of African American workers compared to 38% of Latino workers. And that tells me something, again, about segments of the economy, sectors of the economy, and occupational segregation, and where people work. And overlaid on that, of course, I think is the question of worker organization and unions is a very strong part of that picture. So that's, to me, what the stories add up to the landscape and the geography that are important for us to think about.
Melanie?
Yeah, Jared, I want to hear from you about.
Well, a lot of this is kind of coming together for me, if I can just sort of.
Well, okay, say what you like.
Yeah,
but I want to make sure that you address how the choices made by business to reward work, how that's having an effect here.
That's part of where I'd like to try to go, because I want to sort of try to, like I said, try to put a lot of this together. So, I mean, the thing that I'm hearing from Juan and Justine is that there are a lot of people who have not just great intentions, but are willing to follow through on those great intentions.
Correct.
They're willing to put in the equity sweat to accomplish their goals. And what you just heard from Tom, and from myself earlier when I talked about the structural deficiencies in the economy, the erosion of the policy tissue that used to connect income and work for more people, is a set of developments that have, in Tom's research, led to tremendous concentration of wealth. So I'll make it political for half a second here. This is Washington. Wealth, the wealth inequality that Tom described is interacting with our, I view it as a deeply toxic system of money in politics, where where funders can essentially buy the politics and the politicians they want. And thank you. And much of what they've done is responsible for an erosion of policy that's making it more difficult for folks with great intentions and willing to put in the sweat equity to realize those intentions to get where they need to go. So you talk about competitiveness in the labor market. That was a great point. But we've been at full employment only 30% of the time since 1979. Right. We've been at full employment only 30% of the time since 1979. So those competitive pressures have largely been absent. The minimum wage is a piece of this connective tissue that has eroded. You mentioned overtime. The overtime, the Labor Department under Barack Obama was actually trying to do something about that, and unfortunately it's going to be unwound now. There are a set of work supports, the Earned Income Tax Credit, housing subsidies, nutritional subsidies. These are key work supports that help the kinds of people that you're talking about take the earnings that they're getting from their job, and in a full employment economy, having some competitive pressure to boost those earnings with a set of work supports that bring their incomes up to a level where they actually might be able to put more aside. So to me, we've got a problem, we've got a set of problems, and it has to do with wealth concentration, money in politics, and the erosion of a set of policies, including work supports, that could really help the kinds of persons you're serving connect to this economy in a way that would really bring work and wealth together in a way that we want to.
So, yes, it sounds like. So I want to look in an optimistic direction here. And Justine, I want to have you tell me what you've learned from your efforts to address these issues, and what do you see as maybe some promising
Right. So I will say that I'm sometimes accused of being, like the eternal optimist in the face of our clients who are struggling. But I am an optimist, and I guess one of my hopes, which is based on the data that we see daily, is that employers are beginning to value their workforce as an asset more than they have up until recently. And I will say also I've been influenced by the work of Zainab Tan around the ability for employers to benefit and to have a competitive advantage by investing in their workforce as an asset, complemented by focusing on sort of operational efficiency and operational improvements. But if you take that concept further in terms of the work that we do, what we see on a daily basis is, first of all, overwhelming demand for our services from employers. Employers asking us to come in and help and deliver trusted financial guidance because they believe their employees deserve better, but also because they believe that it's smart business. And they believe it's smart business because they see that when they deliver our services, their employees are more loyal, they're less stressed, and that it also sort of drives an overall better culture that they believe connects to greater productivity. Now, we don't have that data, and so far not having the data hasn't prevented employers from telling us they don't need that data. Anecdotally, they see that. So the question is whether or not we have to wait for full employment or whether or not there's already evidence that a financially distressed workforce is harming productivity, and then investing in, and I don't mean just wages, but the overall package of financial wellness and asset development is truly a competitive advantage. And it's not just that it is a competitive advantage, but that employers are starting to see it as such. Therefore, tools like, so for example, what we believe is that EITC is, this example of unfulfilled potential. Employers all have the data that tells them whether or not their workforce is eligible for EITC. So an employer is in this wonderful position of ensuring their workers take advantage of what is probably the single best opportunity to help someone get out of poverty. Employers are now asking us to help them design that tool so that they ensure their workers are taking advantage of that. And that's pretty low-hanging fruit.
So that sounds like one way in which help can be replicated. More organizations like yours.
Delivering, yes.
Possibly more employers having that resource available to them and to their employees.
Yes.
Okay.
I don't know if
that's instructive.
Add any optimism to the...
Boy, well, I think we have to preserve things like the EITC, preserve as many of the supports as we possibly can at this moment in time, because I do agree that those supports are essential, particularly to our population. But I do also think that we really need to look local, right? We've needed to look local for a long time. We have initiatives happening in Chicago now where hospitals who had never thought about how much power they have in just their hiring practices on a day-to-day basis, and how they need to look towards the community and build pipelines into the very neighbors that they have next door in their own community. And so there's just heightened, more enlightened thinking on the part of those local institutions where if they just change some practices, we can open a whole lot of doors. And so I'm optimistic about that, but I'm also very concerned that the net effect of those local efforts are just going to get taken over by the loss of supports at a federal level. And they will get taken. The scale of that is just too big.
Have you tried to build work and wealth strategies into your operation there? You talked a lot about education, but beyond that?
We do, absolutely. Yeah. So what we ensure is that those financial supports, those financial coaches are available from the moment the learner has decided to be a part of our learning platform, because they need those supports while they're learning, and then they could take advantage of the increased earning opportunities that they have later on once they get the better job. And so we've seen great impact when we do that.
Let me jump in on the optimism side.
Okay.
So as a professor, I'm very privileged. One of my privileges is that I get to present my work all over the country, a lot of different places. And I only do it in a way that puts me in touch with community-based organizations and grassroots organizations. And we have a number of partnerships with those organizations across the country. And that's the optimism of seeing the work that's being done on the ground, of organizations that are leading folks who want to get to a better place. It's part of our job to get their hurdles out of the way. It's to get the hurdles of policy in DC, of policy at the state levels, that provide the obstacles for employer-based retirement pensions not to exist. So quick examples. State of Illinois spent, what is it now, like 5 years, Ida? Working on patching a hole for workers employed, workers who work at small and medium-sized shops that didn't have access to retirement security. The state of Illinois passed a law that provides that to happen. The state of California is in the process of implementing a sort of similar law, both of which finding the hole in the system that existed for large groups of people, predominantly workers of color because of the sectors that they were involved in. From my point of view, win-win. The Treasury Department, the My IRA, is something a little different, but also trying to fill a hole in the system. Political. Yeah, those are policy. Those are actions. Lobbying had to be done. The groundswell, the community organizing, had to push that forward. Now comes along a congressman in Washington who wants federal legislation to override those state legislations because the M word is being used. Mandate. Employers are mandated, they think, to provide retirement pension plans for their workers if you have 25 or more workers. So those are the sources of optimism in the organizations, the people, the policy across the country, but it's the obstacles that we still we really have to be very aware of and struggle against.
Jared, what do you see as the potential for employers to help address work and wealth challenges of low and moderate income families? I mean, you've talked about policies being rolled back, and it seems like it might be more up to employers. And right now,
I think the connection that Justine was making was interesting, and I sort of like the fact that you said, we're going to do this even before we get the data, which I commend. A lot of times economists will explain to you why your good idea isn't really as good an idea as you thought, and the economists might be wrong. I do think there is really some mileage to be made in that particular space. We happen to have a pretty low productivity problem right now in the economy. Productivity growth is very low, and it's really hard to raise living standards when that particular metric, output per hour, is growing as slowly as it's been. And I think that one of the reasons is we do divest in our workforce. I mean, we have a couple of examples here of actual investment, but there's not enough of that. And we need to multiply these people by a large X factor, so there's a lot more of that going on. But I do think that the kinds of things that Tom was just describing on the ground and that Justine and Juan are doing are obviously germane and relevant. I will say a bit about this kind of tight labor market thing. Chicago and New York, obviously you can find groups with high unemployment rates in those cities, but the unemployment rates are very low in those places. And by the way, today as we speak, about 3 hours ago, the Federal Reserve raised interest rates because they think the economy is maybe growing a little too quickly, getting a little too hot. The unemployment rate is close to what they think full employment is. Now we can argue about whether that's a good idea or not. Certainly there are populations whose unemployment rates are multiples of the average. But that said, we do have a labor market wherein investing in your workforce is actually going to be a smart and necessary thing, or you risk leaving money on the table. Because if demand gets strong enough and you're unable to meet the demand for the product or service you sell because you're disinvesting in your workforce, or you're not hiring the folks, or you're unwilling to bid wages up to get and keep the workers you need. So in that sense, the tightness of the overall job market could be a real asset.
Okay. So we're going to start a Q&A in a few minutes, so please start thinking of your questions, audience. And we're just going to talk a little bit more about politics here. And as we move into that, Tom, I wanted to ask you a question, because clearly the anxiety, the economic anxieties of middle class, particularly the white working middle class, is what helped get Donald Trump elected as president. And I wanted to ask you, since you've studied racial inequality quite a bit, do you think those economic anxieties among many white working class people have eclipsed the attention placed on minorities and their
Wow, I get that question. So it's nothing none of us have thought about before and since November. I think a lot of what we've been saying in terms of the landscape, especially since the early 1970s, is really a story for everybody about stalled mobility. It's a story about stagnating standard of living. It's about families having to compensate in ways that make them work harder, have less leisure time, all kinds of ways families compensate for that. In an era of increased ratcheted up inequality. Right? Yes, white workers are hurt. Yes, white workers are feeling pain of that. Right? It's the first time in quite a while that, if I can use the phrase, white workers are feeling a similar kind of pain, a similar kind of status anxiety that other ethnic and racial groups in the United States have been feeling for much longer periods of time. So it's an and question. It's not a but or an or question. It's race and economics that's at play here. I do think that in the electoral cycle, the attention, the media attention, clearly got riveted to what's the base of this right-wing movement. And it gets articulated, in some ways accurately so, as a group that's in American society that is fastly losing its privilege or dominant status. White workers, white middle class compared to workers of color, middle class, African Americans, Latinos, Asians, immigrants, etc. In that dialogue, there has been and continues to be a lot of pandering to that anxiety. And the pandering to the anxiety is the answer. Not the answers that we're talking about. Not the answers that go upstream to where those problems are created and talk about the structures of work, that talk about unions, that talk about paid leave, that talk about retirement benefits, that could ameliorate and make a U-turn to the living standard of many of the groups that we're talking about. So for me, it's where the focus is put in any one conversation, and I will just say I scream at my television set every time some hotshot journalist sits down and says, now we're going to talk to a group of real Americans.
You're not talking about me, right?
No, I'm definitely not. And the real Americans are middle-aged or old white workers.
I see.
There's a group of real Americans that includes a lot more diverse set of folks than that.
So
but that gets
okay.
defined as the norm.
It's a good lead into our final question before Q&A. You don't all have to answer this. Time is of the essence, but clearly a lot has changed politically in this country in the last few months and weeks, and there are new movements developing, calls for progressive change. I just wonder, what opportunities and risks do you see emerging for closing this gap between work and wealth in the coming years? Opportunities or risks? Just one.
I'll throw out a risk.
One each, okay.
So I'll just say really quick, we're all about delivering trust, because we believe that at the end of the day, relationships are critical to how we manage our money, to how we manage our jobs, and the relationship between borrower and lender, or where you're saving your money. All of these things rely on trust and being able to feel comfortable sharing your information, comfortable sharing your money. And the erosion of that trust is going to erode the ability for low-income individuals to feel like they can actually take advantage of products and services that are critical to them getting ahead. So my take is the fear factor that is now prevalent in the communities we're serving.
Okay.
Our clients are going into hiding.
Okay.
And I'll just sort of leave it at that.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say the biggest risk, I think, and it's my biggest fear is further divisions among people in poverty. When you look at, and we're going to do everything we can to combat that, right? But when you look at, we need to have empathy for, and we need to have a reach out of relationship to people in rural communities. We need to build stronger bonds in urban communities. But the pressures are going to be really strong. When you talk about cities like mine that say we're going to be a sanctuary city, a welcoming city, and the pressure of not getting certain federal funds, or people in communities thinking they're not going to get federal funds, those are real pressures that go against poor people working together, and we're going to have to work extra hard to keep those coalitions going.
Okay.
So
Jared.
on the...
Oh, wait,
sorry.
Yeah, let's... I'm just going to let Jared
No, that's all fine. Go
speak.
ahead. Fair.
Just-
Okay, so I see risks.
Okay.
And we've been talking about inequality, and we heard earlier about Aspen's interest in it. So a lot of the inequality that's going on, I've been describing as a function of structural changes in the economy and the absence of policy to offset it. There's a great risk of that inequality being severely increased by a redistribution upward. This week, so this is current events, this week we learned about a conservative health care plan, which, by the way, health care obviously should have been on my list of work supports, critical work support for the kinds of people we're talking about, health care coverage, obviously. We learned about a plan that wants to cut Medicaid by 25% and take that almost $1 trillion and give it to the wealthiest, a pretty narrow slice, give it to the wealthiest Americans. That would make Tom's statistics look even more skewed. Now, who sat in a meeting and said, I've got a great idea, let's take 25% of Medicaid and give it to rich people in tax cuts? And everybody said, yeah, good idea, that's right, let's go with that. And, and I'm not being too partisan here, because even Republicans are saying, no, sorry, that goes a little too far, at least in the Senate. And then tomorrow, we're going to see a budget that significantly undermines a lot of the kinds of ideas that we've been talking about here. So the sort of barriers that Tom said, the one thing you want to do is try to not place barriers in front of people. Well, some of the kinds of programs they're going to get whacked in the budget that's going to be introduced tomorrow are very much about, I think, rebuilding those barriers.
Okay. Tom, close it out.
Oh, dear.
Final words.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for showing up on a very windy evening. Risk. So.
Or opportunity.
I'm going to go risk opportunity.
Okay.
Thank you. We need to have a balance. I think a balance between maintaining a progressive vision for where we want American society to go. And we need to stay dedicated to that project. At the same time, we need to balance that with the resistance and the protections that need to happen, that will help us in turn build the kind of supports in terms of population and movements, and maybe nudge certain political party or two to get us to that vision. Risk, in particular, just an example. Sometimes we don't realize not how good we had it, but a system that was working fairly well for people we're concerned about, very low-wage workers, until it's attacked and it's gone. The hour and wage division of the Department of Labor in the last administration built up its inspectors by 1,200, enforcing wage theft and other protections of very low-wage workers. I don't think I have to complete the sentence about what's going to happen to that division. That's a protection that was built up over time, a system, a policy that we need to keep protecting. On the positive side, I do think that more of the opportunities, given the current political environment in DC and in many of the states, we do need to keep looking at the states as laboratories, as pilots, whether it's children's savings accounts, whether it's retirement plans, whether it's baby bonds, whether it's labor protection, whatever it is that we find can work and work well, and then start to move that to other states, and then finally to nationally. Finally, Jarrett just laid out the changes in Medicaid. Before that happens, we should demand, sorry, I get totally rhetorical here, we should demand what's demanded of social justice and progressive advocates whenever we suggest something. Before we give the wealthy that money, I want to see the random controlled double-blind study in the field for a decade with data done by RAND. And then we'll decide if it was a good idea or not.
Okay. So we're going to move to Q&A. And he has had his hand up for quite a while.
We've left 3 minutes for Q&A this hour. I would like to have heard perhaps a little bit of a focus of the questions on what are the opportunities or challenges that might have come from other countries than the United States in these areas, whether it's workforce or healthcare or income transfer or even housing, which then affect the overall economies, the wealth, and the income, because there could be cautions or there could be causes of optimism from other countries. We don't clearly have enough time, but I would suggest in other contexts to frame the discussion a little bit more broadly than just the United States.
Quickly, let me just say 2 areas where other countries do healthcare and education in such a way that affords lower income people a much better chance to build wealth.
Okay. Yes. Right here.
Hi, thank you all very much. First, I want to call attention to Sheldon Whitehouse's incredible book called Captured: The Corporate Infiltration of American Democracy. It documents some of these issues very strongly. Questions. The Supreme Court has a role to play in tilting certain legislation or supporting it. The role of housing vouchers, the role of HUD. We haven't even talked about that and how critical that is. There's a lot to be very concerned about. And yes, you've talked about the role of the grassroots in countering some of this. The power of the Chamber of Commerce is huge. And the role of corporate money, including the Koch brothers, is tremendous. We can work against it, but it's a very uphill fight. I'd love comments on that.
Who'd like to address that?
So, I mean, a lot of my comments were supposed to be directed towards that, and we're short for time. So I can amplify what I was trying to say afterwards. So yeah, I think the interaction of concentrated wealth and money in politics is a huge part of the problem we're talking about.
Yeah, I would also point, we've talked a little bit about some good examples and some better employment practices. I think if we not necessarily always just go to the Supreme Court or the macro level, if we talk about the institutions we're involved in, our employers, and in a very positive way, I'm going to call out Prudential. Right? Prudential has started a process that looks at where their procurement comes from, where their supply chain comes from, and thinking about, are there ways of points of disruption in that where those systems can be transferred, trained over time to entrepreneurs and workers of color. Right? It's an institution. Right? It's a large employer. There are lots of places like that that understand in the long term a satisfied workforce, a diverse workforce, is not only more efficient, it's more stable. Did I get it right?
But just to add on that, I think we have to pay more and more attention to local communities and grassroots leadership. I mean, and in political parties too, by the way. I mean, if you look at the representation of staff in both the Bernie Sanders and the Clinton campaigns at the early stages of Latinos, it was horrendous. And you know how we got it up? We hacked their website. We hacked them. We found out just how many people were working for them. And, you know, all of a sudden, it went up. Why do we have to do that, you know, in the very institutions that we've been traditionally a part of?
The power of shaming.
The power of shaming.
Other questions? Sir? There's the microphone for you.
Just in one, I'm the perpetual optimist. I'm Ibrahim Mukman. I'm an economic development consultant. But one of the things that nobody's mentioned today is you're in Washington, D.C., and probably like maybe New York and Chicago. There's a significant number of people every month coming home who are returning citizens, ex-offenders. How does that deal with that?
Critical to the well-being of our overall society. I mean, obviously, we have to decrease the number of people going in, right? And provide more opportunities for those that are coming out. But the real solution, I believe, is in electing people to office and state's attorneys' positions, and in the, goes back, you know, the big difference, I tell you, in Cook County, you got Sheriff Dart now, and you got Kim Foxx, okay? And so you got the possibility of real systemic change that will change that pipeline starting now.
There's a set of fair hiring practices, and I don't know, you may know more about their effectiveness than I do, but one of them I've written about is Ban the Box. I'm sure you're familiar with that. And there's been some research on both sides, but I've tried to weigh it with a, you know, with a really, without a thumb on the scale, and to me it looks like it's helpful. And for people who don't know, this is that if someone has a criminal record, Ban the Box means you can't ask them to check the box acknowledging their criminal record at the very beginning of the interview, in which case they get filtered out before they even a chance. It doesn't mean that the employer never gets to ask, but it does ban that box right at the get-go. I think that's been an advance, but the pipeline issues to me are magnitudes greater.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you, everyone, for coming. I hope it was informative for you.